Welcome to QInsight from QGate, where we explore where CRM, AI, emerging technology, and the real world meet. I'm Steve Clarke.
And I'm Alastair Jupp. For this episode, we're welcoming back Steve Gibson from Lumion Consulting. Steve joined us last time to talk through our AI journey so far, warts and all, the realities of moving from experimentation to an integrated working. This time, we're picking up where we left off to explore how the conversation has changed. We'll be discussing why the real opportunity for SMEs isn't doing more work with fewer people, but maybe gaining access to capabilities and expertise that were previously out of reach. We'll look at how AI is evolving from help for assistant into something that can become part of the business operating system, why workflows matter as much as prompts, and what happens when technology starts changing what smaller organizations are capable of achieving.
Steve, welcome back. Excellent to have you on the show once again.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Good stuff, good stuff. So, Steve, look, as Alastair just pointed out, things change, and we've now in season 3 of our podcast, and we've been doing this for probably the best part of about a year now, and it is crazy how much has moved on from an AI standpoint in that period of time. So when we spoke previously in our pre-production call, actually before this one of us coined the phrase AI in dog years. It feels like now, weeks can change, but in reality, it feels like dog years when we're talking about the pace at which AI is changing, dare we say, improving. So I'll start off with a question for you, Steve. What do you think has changed most or most dramatically since that conversation, which was, 6 months ago, something along those lines?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Steve, I think the most obvious thing I think we've seen is probably the evolution from AI that answers. So through Copilot, ChatGPT, maybe stuff we were talking about. I think at the time we were probably talking about Copilot within some of the Office 365 apps and getting quite excited and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of moved on into AI that actually does. So Microsoft partnership with Anthropic, rolled out Co-work as an example. Mm-hmm. Agents that actually fundamentally complete tasks or projects on our behalf, right? And that's a big enough shift anyway. And just to illustrate the pace of change and just to really trip us up again, we had the sort of minor press releases from Microsoft this week for a product called Scout, which they claim they built in 8 weeks, which is what they are now calling a different group of AI called autopilots, which are always on AI helping us do our daily tasks. And Scout is something that sits within your environment and is genuinely like another person. I mean, to the extent that we're talking about it being your assistant and maybe giving you a phone call to find out about stuff. And that evolution is not. It's not like a particular skill that AI has moved on. It's like 3 fundamental shifts there along the way. So I mean, yeah, pace of change. We met 7 days ago to discuss this episode, and we've had another fundamental shift since then.
I was about to say, I wasn't even aware of Scout, which bodes well. So immediately after this recording, I'm going to go and check that out. But
worth saying, not on general release yet.
Yeah,
probably just a pilot project. They reckon 13,000 Microsoft employees are using it on a daily basis internally, and expected to roll out pretty quickly if the pace of change is anything to go by. But look, exciting times, and it means we're talking about the right stuff.
You kind of one of the lines I was going to mention here was about the pace, the pace of change and the judgments you have to. One of the big things that's really changed, I think, is you've got to be really careful with your planning and what you're actually going to do, and particularly what you're going to invest money in building, because tomorrow or next week It could be built by Microsoft and Copilot. It could be built by ChatGPT. So you can invest lots of time and money in building an amazing agent to do something that's really important to your business, and find out next week that actually one person could have done it in about an hour and delivered it. So the capabilities of these tools now is going up and up and up. It's doing more. It's getting access to more. Yeah, and it's just changing. And also, just to be inclusive here, could be cat years, right? I think that's kind of a similar concept. For the cat lovers out there.
that was one listenership that I wasn't considering with that phrase. So forgive me, any cats or cat lovers that are listening to the show. But look, this is crazy, right? So let's go back to this at Scout, Steve. We spoke to Sandra Kuzenko earlier in the season, so a couple of episodes ago, and one of the topics were this rate of change, and actually, how do you choose what horse to back? And ponies, like, I'm trying to be inclusive of horses now, but like, what horse do you back when you're choosing a technology to embed in your business operation? Because we started with ChatGPT, and this is a highly abridged timeline, but we started with ChatGPT as a main kind of platform. Then Copilot really came to the fore. Microsoft have then, and I don't even think it's on public release either, but Cowork came through as the next iteration of AI assistant, AI agent. We're now talking, for the first time I've heard of it, Scout, another Microsoft product. Now, this is just Microsoft centric. You can imagine that most of the other big platforms out there, the Claudes, the Geminis, the ChatGPTs, whatever that might look like, they have similar roadmaps. We are just adding more and more option to the table, more and more complexity. And there's kind of a double barrel question here is one, how do you make that decision? And we touched on it to a degree with Sandra, but also I think there's a real danger here of becoming overwhelmed and not doing anything. And when in sales, one of your competitors is the other consultancy that they're trying to sell against you. But another one of the competitors is doing nothing, is standing still. It's got to be a real risk, hasn't it? Like, as a business, what's the advice? Do you kind of hedge your bets, or do you think actually you've just got to push on with something?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think fundamentally that it is overwhelming. Like, it's a really overwhelming time. Like, we're, consider us all to be probably technologists first and foremost, right? And it's quite overwhelming for us. I mean, people claim on various LinkedIn posts and everything that they're all over everything and ready to go. Like, it's fine. Like, you might understand the technology, but it still doesn't remove the fact that technology's got to be applied to a situation in a business and be repeatable and being production ready, right? Like that. It's great knowing some capabilities of what these new things can do. How can you implement them? And even for people with our kind of experience, it's a tough time to be able to say to a client with any great confidence, this is what you should back. Like, it's no longer a product. It's like it's a roadmap, right? It's where, like Ali said, how do you plan? The answer is quite difficult, but I think you have to go back to fundamentals, right? It's all well and good when Copilot first came out, or and you've got meeting transcriptions and you've got calendar planning, the stuff that everyone does, right? It wasn't very specific. It was quite generic, and it was something everyone could buy into, and a lot of people have done that and are getting great benefit out of. Now it's about how do we convert that into something, and we'll talk about capability versus capacity in a bit, but how are we going to get something that gives our business some benefit? And I think to start that journey, you need to understand process, outcomes, back to what we always do, right? That it's still first and foremost understand people. You've just got a bigger armory of stuff that can help you solve these problems. I think you have to probably think a bit wider and a bit more ambitious than maybe before, but those fundamental steps are still probably the first things to take, I would think.
Absolutely.
There's a quote by Theodore Levitt that I think is on my LinkedIn profile. Actually, it's something that I've always held close to me, which was creativity is thinking up new things, innovation is doing new things, right? And I think with AI, you have got to do things, and you have got to take those risks of actually it might be a lot cheaper to do it tomorrow. But the reality is, if the pace of everything going, people can't keep up. So if you've not even started understanding and using, and your teams are not actually engaged in AI and using it in anger, then you're just going to get further and further behind. So although I did say you be careful, be cautious where you adopt, which how much technology you adopt from an AI perspective, because it might be taken over. You do have to do it, because you've got to get your people on the ladder, and you've got to get your people understanding the capabilities. And I think there are still a lot of people that just, my wife will kill me for saying this, but I think she's just started using it now, but she was completely against it, not interested at all. But now she's starting to see the value.
And also, people, but also some. If you think about it in the wider context, some really big industries that have not yet found a way to do it. I was talking to somebody from education over the weekend. No idea. Like Department of Education, no guidance yet as to really how AI is going to be used in that entire sector. So it comes down to there's kind of two plays there, and we probably misrepresent the market of people who have done nothing yet. It's probably still
bigger than we think.
I think probably bigger than your first instinct. I would think.
Yeah, I mean, what you just touched on there for education comes back to the commoditization of expertise, right? Actually, you've got all this expertise at your fingertips now. Why do you need to teach it, right? So, you have to teach people how to access it in an effective way and apply it in an effective way, rather than actually be trained on how to do that particular task. It's a massive shift in society, right? I think.
Right.
And when you think about education as well, and it's an interesting topic, maybe one we could touch on a later date, but with all of us on this call, we've got on this episode, should I say, we've got kids, relatively young kids. And when you think not only about the utilization of AI in education, actually, it's a really interesting topic of thought. When do you start introducing children to AI? That's a can of worms, but it's a valid topic though. We really do need to think about this, because when my two boys were very young, I was actually quite against them getting tablets. But when their homework comes in the form of an app for maths and literacy and whatever else, they've got to use it. So anyway, I digress slightly. I want to go back though. Steve, you said the L word, LinkedIn, and that prompted a recollection of a post that Alastair put on LinkedIn not too long ago. Now, a lot of the AI narrative is still about capacity, going to your point earlier, Steve, capacity versus capability. And actually that capacity piece is doing more work faster with fewer constraints. But Ali, the post, and you personally, you argue actually that you think the bigger opportunity here for SMBs is capability rather than capacity. What's the difference between those two? And actually, why does it matter?
Right. So let me put this in the context of SME. Everything you hear in the news at the moment is about AI taking jobs, people being made redundant. My belief is, and I'm maybe it's just my opinion, right, that's happening at the big enterprise level, because big enterprises have expertise in pretty much everything they ever need, because they have the budget to do it, they have the money to do it. They've got teams of analysts, they've got teams of developers, they've got teams of strategists. They can recruit them because they have that money to do it. And if you think about it, if you can bring in AI to replace that and just put one person oversight over the top of it, you're kind of good to go, and you reduce your capacity. You increase your capacity, but you reduce your people. Within an SMB, you may have one person doing that particular job, or you might not have that person at all, right? If you've only got one person do that job and you bring in AI as the expertise to help and support that person, you cannot get rid of the one person, because you're then removing the human oversight to that role, right? Or the other route is you don't even have that. As a small business, you have to make judgments on budgets, on time, what you focus your people on, and you can't spend hours and lots of hours on writing strategies, lots of hours on developing something that may or may not work, lots of hours on analyzing things. But actually now AI is kind of given that access to that sort of expertise within SMBs. So I think there's kind of with enterprise, it seems to be a really negative kind of conversation about capacity and efficiency and moving people out of the business, where SMEs actually is about, there's an opportunity here to level up with those big enterprises, because all of a sudden you have access to expertise at a level you can afford. And that's what I mean by the big opportunity for SMEs is capability. You can do things that you never did before. And that's the big one. Capacity is doing more of the same. Capability is doing what you couldn't do before. I think that's probably the best way to just summarize.
The democratization of capability. That's the phrase you used. Is that what you've just explained?
Yeah, in essence, yeah.
I think it's right. It's at that enterprise scale, you've got lots of repeatability, right? Like there's loads of examples. There was one of the big parcel companies recently put an agent into their sort of call centers, and it was just to look at password reset phone calls and to automate them, right? And it saved something ludicrous, like about $60 million or something in annualized savings. And that is headcount, right? And that's exactly what Ali's talking about. You don't really have situations like that in businesses of less than 50 people very often, right? You've got different challenges. You've got typical challenges of stuff we just don't get round to doing. And you've got stuff that we don't have the capability to do, both of which you'd love to do. And where it makes a difference potentially for an SMB is, one, take out that level of menial tasks, which is the stuff we've been talking about, just time saving, and maybe you save yourself 20 or 30%, you could do some more stuff. The other is, like Ali said, it's capability, and that's either through people, like really giving people the chance to go and become massive experts on how they use AI. And you'll get them in businesses because people just want to do it. There'll be people who are desperate to go and do it, and to a certain extent it's giving them the freedom to do so. The other one is things that people like Mike, we keep coming back to Microsoft, but when Microsoft built Dynamics or have built Dynamics, they build it always the same, right? 90% of stuff is the tasks that people do very often, and agents are following the same path. So these are tasks that we want to do at scale, and we want to save money. We talked to a company who had a kind of small, I guess 15 to 20 person call center, right? And the supervisor there said, I'd love to be able to review all my calls. I can only do the occasional call because I'm so busy myself. Microsoft have got a case evaluation agent, which you now stick a load of questions in, and it reviews every one of your cases, gives you a score, gives you feedback, gives the individual person taking the call some feedback. That is a capability, right? They didn't have that. There was no way they could have done that in their business. Turn the agent on, they've literally created another person in their business and a capability. It's fascinating how it goes. I think it's a massive opportunity for SMBs.
Yeah, I'm on a real mission to change the rhetoric around this, because I think SMEs historically have always tried to emulate enterprises, right? They've seen what enterprises do, and they're kind of the model. And I think right now that's what's going on in conversations in boardrooms across the country in SMEs is, well, how do we get autonomous agents? How do we? I think that's a real negative way to look at it. And that needs to switch. You don't want to be copying those guys because they're doing something different to what you're doing. Well, I think what SMEs should be focusing on is that capability and expertise piece, because it's a real differentiator for them, and they have the agility to do it. Right? They haven't got big lumbering. There was a in one of my previous companies, there was this saying that they called it an oil tanker that had to be moved with tugs when they wanted to make a change. And that's quite prevalent within an enterprise. When they're trying to change, it's quite hard to move them. Whereas an SME is the tug, right? It has the ability to change on I can't remember what the saying is. This is a sixpence, isn't it? On a sixpence.
Turn on a sixpence.
Yeah. And that's their biggest strength. If they can get hold of this AI machine in a safe way, the world's their oyster on it.
Yeah.
So
I saw something interesting, just to finish off that point. I saw something recently that said something like 15 to 20% of job roles didn't exist 26 years ago. We were talking about back in 2000, I think. And the fact that a lot of people are being that the good businesses who are really harnessing this are almost giving people, in football terms, like the playmaker role, and just saying, just go and do. I'm not particularly bothered at the moment for the next 6 months what your job title is or what you might be, focused on, but you've got the freedom to go and kind of find stuff in our business where this will fit. And I think that's a great concept. If you've got someone who is engaged, is a good communicator, understands your business, and wants to learn, I actually think that's probably one of the best investments you could make as an SME, is to go, right, I'm quite committed to that. Look, let's come up with some areas we want to attack. Fundamentally, you go where you're essentially our R&D in AI for the next 3 or 4 months and see what you come up with.
That shapes recruitment, right? You want people that are critical thinkers and problem solvers who can spot process and patterns and apply it to patterns. I was asked the other day by someone, we were talking about their son. He's coming up to the end of school, and what he wanted to be was, I think it was a developer, and he's now going, well, what should I advise him in terms of a career path here? And I'm like, that's a really difficult question for me to answer, right? But what I would say is focus on the skill sets. As you said, good communication, problem solving, critical thinking. Those, if you have all of those, and you can go into a business with just a little bit of technology understanding, and you apply those two things together, you'd be hugely valuable to those businesses. Hugely.
We're now at a point, and I think we touched on this in the last season, that gone are the days where a job spec, a job requirement sheet, I'm trying to think of the right word for the term, job listing, it's not is proficient in Outlook or Excel or Word. I think we're AI now, aren't we? Clearly, and it goes back to something that I rather digressed into around when children should be exposed to AI. I don't think it's going to be too long, and it has to happen. Otherwise, we're left behind, or the kids are left behind. But anyway, right. So the topic of this podcast is the rate of change for AI in certainly the time that's elapsed since we last had you on the show, Steve. We've gone and talking about that timeline from AI assistants. We're now talking about agent, co-work, scouts. We're really in the realms of operating now, as AI as operators. Where do we go with that? Or where do businesses go with that? Because when you start adding in, and we'll go to capability, we're not necessarily talking about capacity anymore. Could be both, but for this example, are we in the realms of workflow, full business operation and workflow redesign here, aren't we? These businesses really need to take into account what's available to them, and there's the option here for full scale redesign of operations, like business operations, surely.
Yep. I mean, there is at one end of the spectrum. I mean, let's again draw this back to probably SME type conversations, right? I think it's probably slightly different at enterprise level, but I think what you're now seeing is AI potentially able to perform at least parts, if not all, of a particular process in a business, right? What's an example we would have seen? Like a typical sales process, right? Where you might have human generating leads or something like that. And then there's almost this handoff to an AI agent that will go and research those leads, score those leads, give us all the information we might need, which might have taken us hours before. And then an experienced pre-sales person or something like that is then reviewing the output of that agent, and that is the process, right? The agent is fundamentally part of that process, and that's one part of the process in a wider business. But that's how I think we'll see things building up. How can we use AI effectively to do stuff which is part of our operation that we trust, that is repeatable, throughout our businesses. That's where I think we are going to be focusing in the next 6 to 12 months.
I don't think it's redesign of workflows, in my opinion, not necessarily redesign. It's about getting the foundations right. If you think about typical SME, and I include ourselves in that, right? Along our workflows, there are spreadsheets used. There are things that sit outside of our core systems. There are things that sit on people's desktops that are key to moving that workflow along. The physical kind of stages and of the process and the workflow don't change necessarily, but where your data's aligned along those processes certainly needs to be reviewed. And if there are workarounds happening, you need to understand why those workarounds are actually happening. Because if you then start to try and put AI on top of it, it just kind of, it's not got access to all the data. It's not working in the right place. It's not doing the right things at the right times because the data it's got is not telling it what it's doing the right way. So I think in the first instance, probably an audit of your workflow is the first step to do, is to understand. And I don't mean the workflow that people sat, as an MD, I'm sat going, this is how I know my business to run. Actually, does it actually run that way? Probably not. The way your teams do that work will be very, very different to what the paper says. So you have to do your due diligence on how your business actually operates and not how you think it operates. That's a real critical piece for me.
Yeah.
Are we in dangerous territory of being exposed? And I say we, the royal we, Qgate. Is there the potential for AI to expose what could, for all intents and purposes, be a weak operating system or weak processes? Again, that's not just us as an organizer. Maybe it is. I'll throw the question, Ali, to you. Like, do you think that's a risk, right?
What is the question? Do we have a weak operating system?
No, it's not. No, but like and you just hit the nail on the head with that, really, because not with us having a weak operating system, but when you start looking at business processes and manual steps like spreadsheets, we've got, I would argue, a pretty robust, well thought out, and over a period of time, a refined business process and how we operate. Okay. But if we or another organization, let's say, deploys some form of AI, whatever, guys, that might be, that actually, if the business processes aren't there in the first place, or if they're broken, or if they're not particularly efficient, that's going to bring exposure in that, I guess.
Yeah, cards on the table here, right? Our system, our kind of core systems are probably pushing 10 years old, right? Over that 10 years, we're an IT business. We've layered on capability. We've layered on more and more. Some of that capability is still valid. Some of it is not. Over time, your business morphs, and that's where things creep in, where you have to do bypasses. We're an SME. We don't have the time to sit there reworking our systems and reworking our workflows every year or so. We can't do that. What we do have to do is ensure the data's in the right place. So, we have it all there. But our workflow needs work. We all know that. We're saying in this room, it needs work, and every other business is going to be the same, and at varying points of kind of capability. So, I'm not sitting here saying we're perfect, but what AI is doing is uncovering where we're not perfect. Right? It's I want you to do X, Y, and Z. Oh, well, it hasn't given me what I was expecting, and that's because it's sat on someone's desktop, that particular element, or a really critical element of it. And it could be as simple as, I don't know, an approval email, for example, or, approval that's handled outside of the system verbally, for example. Because that happens a lot in small business, right? You'd phone someone up and check. You wouldn't necessarily have a structured, automated or documented approval process. So if your approval process is to phone up someone, a director or whatever, to say, we're happy to proceed with this, no problem, carry on, the AI doesn't know that approval process exists. Gotcha. So when you put your AI over the top, it's not going to do that step, right? It's not going to check in with. That's quite an extreme example, but that kind of cascades all the way through the system and your workflows.
I mean, you came at that slightly from a sort of risk perspective there, Steve. I think it's quite a good angle, actually. I think where it becomes a real risk is where a competitor of whichever industry you are in is utilizing AI. Like we're probably a strange example. I was just about to say our customers don't care whether we're using AI internally or not. I think that's probably not true, because when we use it internally, we deliver the benefit to client. But let's go with that, right? The customer wants something that is of high quality, it is competitively priced, and is delivered as quickly as possible. That never changes, right? So if a competitor of ours is using AI in a particular way, whether that's in project management, in the administration of what we do, development, R&D, whatever, if it's helping any of those parts of what we deliver, then yes, it is a risk. Doing nothing is a big risk. So I don't think we are at risk of that, because I think we commit quite heavily to making sure we're not doing that. So I think for any SME, if you're thinking about risk of doing nothing, it's the risk of your competitor doing something, which is the real risk, and actually changing the market that they're in. That's where I think there's some real risk.
Okay. I want to go back to a topic that we touched on earlier on in this episode, which was humans still matter. And it prompts the phrase, and it's one of my favorite AI phrases, the human in the loop, human in the loop, if I could say it, my own favorite phrase. It just conjures up, Ghost in the Shell, the Japanese manga, human in the loop. I really like that. But we are probably seeing less and less of it now. The concern that people are going to lose their jobs. And I don't know if that's market dependent organization size dependent. If you think enterprise versus SMBs, and you hit the nail on the head earlier on, Ali, with that. But Steve, I'll ask the question. You engage with businesses that are implementing AI virtually on a daily basis, I'd probably say. Is that a fair assessment? Is that fear's waning slightly, or is it changing?
I think we've been typically led again by some of the big stories in the industry over the last, I guess, 12 to 18 months now. Obviously, a lot of the huge tech enterprises shelved significant amounts of roles citing AI. Now, there's probably quite a few reasons why they did that, but we are seeing a little bit of a rollback on that, I would suggest. Um, uh, and at the same time, I think what we're seeing from the other sort of smaller end of the market is people becoming slightly more comfortable with AI and where it's going to affect their business. I have yet to see any example from any clients we've worked with where there's something so fully automated by AI that they're genuinely thinking about taking out big parts of their business. Like you might eventually lose some resource here, but the question is then how do you reinvest that? Because typically in this market, it's not about just shelving it. There's a load of stuff you want to be able to do, and that ability to pivot is probably where the better businesses are going to succeed. So if we save 30% of our customer service team's time, are we going to get rid of 30% of people, or are we going to actually increase our customer service capability by 30%? And I think there's a balance, right? But I think that's probably where I think we're at. I don't know, Ali, if you see anything different.
I think it kind of resonates back to what we were just talking about, in that the cost of execution comes down so much with AI and agents. Then judgment becomes the big differentiator, and judgment is a human trait. I could be corrected here, but I don't think AI can do judgment yet. Maybe it will get there. I'm hoping not in my lifetime, but that's a people thing, and that's, for me, that's where human judgment is the essential thing in all of this. It still needs oversight. There was someone quoted a number in one of our previous episodes. Was it 80% accurate? I think AI is 80% accurate. So if you took that human judgment out, are you happy with 20%? Of everything it does to not be on point or not have oversight to see if it's on point? But that's massive. And also, someone, I can't remember who it was. Maybe you'll remember, Steve, but they said that AI isn't intelligent. It's a predictor, and it's a predictor based on the information and data that you have. So that's why when you ask it a mathematics question, right, which can be fairly simple. There was one I was doing the other day. I think it was word count. I was trying to get it to count the words, and for love nor money, it couldn't get that right. Because it was predicting on what it thought and not actually counting the. I put it in, and it would give me, you got a word count of 50, and then it would give me, now you got to work. And what we were actually trying to do was get an SMS message to a certain, I can't remember what the actual characters an SMS is restricted to. So I was talking to a client going, right, well, we were trying to refine this SMS they wanted to send out, and it was saying, we got it at 15, so it was 15 characters that you're allowed. I think it's more than that. It's 200 characters, I think. I said, right, we're at 200. And he said, okay, we can put that out. And I then put it in, and it go, no, sorry, that's more than the allowed characters. So I'd have to go back to the client and go, I'm really sorry, but the character count's out. And we'd spend it, and we were trying to refine down a hugely long message down to something that fitted in the character count for SMSs. But as a prime example, right, it really highlighted that actually be careful and make sure you keep human judgment in what it's doing.
And continuously as well. I think there is, if you've got processes that are have some AI automation within them, that's a perfect point. Are you going to bank your credibility on the fact that's going to work first time. I would hasten to add, probably don't, because we're all quite new to it, right? You might have established what you want it to do. Age-old problem, right? We test 80% of scenarios, we think it's fine, and then a strange scenario comes up. We talked about having potentially like agent owners, almost as if you're the manager of the agent. I think that's probably how we have to treat this right now, is that somebody is there to review output, to refine the model or agent that you've built. Like if you find an issue, don't just correct it and move on, correct it and correct the model. And then we get this continuous improvement loop until we're at a point where we may well be comfortable to fully automate it and kind of move on to the next thing. But there's another human role we've just talked about that didn't exist before, right?
You touched on something really important there, Steve. Right? I don't know the actual percentages, but my assumption is, let's say the model itself that you're using is maybe 20% of the capability. All the rest is your governance, your data, and your testing, right? So if you were going to build a completely autonomous agent from the ground up, launch it and publish it, your testing piece has to be huge to make sure it's not doing something, particularly if it's client facing or something like that. But actually, if you go the way you've just kind of articulated, that you have human oversight, you're almost doing the testing live. You can get it up and running. You still got the human over, and you're correcting and tweaking as you're going over a period of time until you get to the point where you go, actually, we're pretty comfortable with this now. And then you can start stepping back a little bit with the judgment. So it's like an iterative approach. And all the conversation I'm not saying don't do this stuff. Is just do it in the right way. And I think what you've just said there is a very sensible way to do the agent and the autonomous piece, where you just have that human oversight until you've done a lot of testing and your clients have done every possible scenario they might throw at you for that particular agent, because that's just the safe way to do it and the effective way to do it.
I'm going to give you a very real example of that's happening this week at the time of recording this episode anyway, that via Uber in London, you can now book a self-driving taxi. Now, and it was David Panny we had at the last episode of the previous season, Ali, that we were referring to, that AI isn't intelligence, it's prediction. 80% is fine when you're trying to kind of get a character limit down under 200 and you can do a bit of finessing. 80% is not fine when you've got people crossing the street in front of you at a pelican or a zebra crossing, is it? So, yeah, and actually for the time being, to mirror having people at least supervise whatever's going on from an AI perspective, drivers are still sat in those seats while they're doing the testing. So we're okay from that standpoint if you're going to London anytime soon.
But it comes back to the enterprise thing, right? Uber's a big company and they can do this testing very thoroughly, right? Because it's what they're known for. With an SME, if it's what you're known for, you probably don't have the budget to do the testing that you need to risk what you're known for. I don't know whether I've articulated that well, but that's kind of where I am with it.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, Steve, I think we're about at the end of the show now. We're running out of time, but thank you as always for joining us for the second time. So we greatly appreciate it. What I typically ask of our guests as a final thought is a piece of advice, a practical tip, something along those lines. You've done that once for us already, and I would probably imagine that advice would be, do it, just crack on, something along those lines. It seems to be the consistent theme. So I'm going to deviate slightly. I'm going to, and this might be a little bit silly, but if we spoke again in another 6 AI dog years, which is probably going to be 6 months, next week, what do you think's next? And this is putting you on the spot. There's no preparation here. What do you think's around the corner?
I think it's like, I can't tell you what's going to be next on the tech front, I don't think anyone can. I don't know what's in Microsoft's next 8-week rapid development that they've got planned, because it's crazy ridiculous, right? But I think in terms of actual usage, we've got to see a leveling off of return on investment. I think the technology is way beyond where most businesses are. And at some point, we've got to get to we as technologists and businesses have got to get to the point of, well, we need to use this, right? And that's where, and I don't think the tech is going to slow down. So I think it comes to people like QGate and others who are in this kind of market to help businesses, right, utilize, break down the fear factor and go, right, we're going to have to pick some stuff and really go at this, and let the tech stuff, the product development continue at pace, because it just will. Yeah. And Ali said there's a bit of a risk. We know that. So I think the leveling off has to be, pick what you're going to do, commit to doing it, get some return on investment, because it's got to come to that point.
Good advice. Ali, anything final from you?
I'll answer the same question. I agree with what Steve was saying there. I think outside of the technology, I think the big things that are coming are going to be regulation, right? For me, it's going to get tighter. Microsoft coined this phrase frontier firm, right? Frontier suggests, the Wild West or whatever, you may look at it that way. Ultimately, the Wild West has to be tamed at some point. So for me, it's going to be the tightening of regulation and use, and AI license, like a driving license. I think that's for me is what the big changes are going to be.
Sounds very good. Thank you, Ali.
Steve, thank you for joining us again on the show, and thanks to everyone at home for listening to this episode of QInsight. If you've enjoyed it, be sure to follow or subscribe, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, or YouTube.
Thank you, Ali. That is it for us today. In our next episode, we'll be joined by Jamie Plumridge, who's Channel Director at Enlighten. We will be looking at the hidden infrastructure behind AI, from data centers and GPU demand to power, cooling, and what happens when the technology everyone wants starts running into physical limits. It's a fascinating look at the side of AI most of us rarely think about, but all of us depend on. QInsight is produced by QGate. To learn more about how we're helping organizations navigate CRM, AI, and emerging technology, visit qgate.co.uk. Thank you very much, as always, for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time.